Let's talk a little about how we've organized the United States government for the nuclear weapons program over time, if that's the right word.
Well, of course, if you go from the days when they were owned by the Atomic Energy Commission, and they were issued to the department if somebody decided we needed one. That sort of might have fit the World War II model, but it certainly doesn't fit the deterrence model. But for a number of years, management of the nuclear weapons program was the Albuquerque office. It was the Albuquerque office of the government entity, supported by Sandia National Laboratories as technical assistants. And that worked very well, but because we did it a lot. You know, we were producing 1,000 weapons a year. And one year we produced more weapons than we have deployed today. And then we went through this 20-year period, about 20 years, when we just took care of the current stockpile. We did some dismantlements, we did surveillance, but we weren't really basically refurbishing or building nuclear weapons. During that 20 years, we reorganized. And we reorganized away from the structure that everybody understood and away from the structure that had been so successful in the past. And then we had to go from readiness to production. See, for that 20-year period, we primarily just focused on being ready to do the work that we have to do today, someday. And therefore, we structured ourselves for that. And some things became overriding. Degree of safety, security. They became more important by the mission than the mission, because the mission was just to be ready. Well, then we moved into production. Now it's not just being ready to produce, now we have to produce. And we just simply did not have the management structure to do that. We had allowed the production complex to seriously atrophy. And so ever since we really started production with the W-76, 76-1, we have been struggling with how we adapt this organization to a truly production-oriented outcome. And Johnny Foster and I co-chaired a big study on what we thought needed to be done in order to provide that. It proved to be too hard. And so we're still struggling with how do you actually adapt the structure so that it is adequately production-oriented. Next 30 years, we're in the production mode.
Let me talk about the people in the complex and also in the military that deal with these issues today. And I'll do this in terms of three trends that seem to come together. One of the trends was it wasn't only that we did nuclear testing up until the end of the Cold War, it's also that we had a lot of new designs that they could work on that you'd introduce into the inventory. You'd go through them very quickly. So you had a challenge both in the new design as well as the getting ready for the test. The second thing is, when we came out of the Cold War, there was a long period of time in which nuclear moved from where it had been at the center to, I don't want to say the margins, but it was considered less important by the leadership. When you were chief of staff, you probably could walk into the office of any senior civilian official in the Pentagon who dealt with issues and talk nuclear to them, whereas it became a very specialized subsector of things that were being done. And then the third thing, of course, was the nuclear abolition movement. You'd always had a ban the bomb movement, but all of a sudden you had some very senior figures like George Shultz and Sam Nunn Henry Kissinger and Bill Perry identifying themselves with nuclear demolition.
Yeah.
And my impression is that these things coming together caused a kind of morale problem.
Yeah.
And maybe not just a kind of morale problem, but the idea of, are we in a dead-end profession? We dedicated our life to the right thing.
There was a very varied effect.
Mm-hmm.
All negative, but
Mm-hmm.
some far more negative than others. I should say, or just to set the context, that when we did the 2008 investigation of the unauthorized movement of nuclear weapons, that one of the things we did to try to understand, how did we lose this discipline?
Mm-hmm.
How do we have 5 people in the chain who don't do their job that allows you then to have an unauthorized movement? Because any one of those steps, had they done their job, that could not have happened. So we had 5 dedicated professionals who allowed this to happen. How could that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things we looked at, we just did sort of a media search. Said, how many instances can we find in the last 5 years when somebody at the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, CNO or above, up to the President, has declared loud and clear, this is job 1, this is terribly important, and the nuclear enterprise deserves our attention. 2 in 5 years. If you were to do that for the last 18 months, I can give you 12.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, it was neglected from the president all the way down to the squadron commander.
Mm-hmm.
So that certainly is a manifestation of, at every level all the way down, they were told,
Mm-hmm.
you're not key. What key is the war in Afghanistan? The war in Iraq? Well, of course it's important. You know, you're fighting a war. So it had the least effect in the Navy, which is kind of mysterious in a way, but in a way it's not, because in the Navy, the nuclear enterprise has always been what I call a tough orphan.
Mm-hmm.
That is, it's encapsulated. It's in 5 stovepipes, but they're encapsulated. And they didn't really care whether their parent loved them or not, because they were a tough orphan. In the Air Force, the nuclear enterprise was a spoiled rich kid. I mean, it got the attention of the SecDef and the president and the chief and the secretary of the Air Force. And suddenly, when it didn't get that, the rich kid almost died.
Mm-hmm.
So it had the most effect on the ICBMs for a reason we've already discussed. They were committed to job 1, that's all they did. And suddenly they were getting the message, you're not very important. Getting message from people they admired and respected, we don't even need you.
Mm-hmm.
Including a former commander of STRATCOM, including a former commander of SpaceCom at the time they were responsible for ICBMs. That's a pretty strong message.
Mm-hmm.
So what had to happen, and unfortunately it took about 3 really serious incidents, but the last one, that is the cheating on the test in the ICBM force and the cheating in the nuclear school for the Navy, finally got the attention of the right people, and again I co-chaired that assessment. And when we went to talk to the SecDef afterwards, 1-on-1 or 2-on-2, John Harvey and I and the SecDef and the DepSecDef, we insisted it be a private meeting. And I won't say much about it except we told the SecDef, this is your problem. You own this problem.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't delegate it. You own this problem. And the SecDef said, I agree. I own this problem. And then he amended it, he said, the DepSecDef and I own this problem. That started a chain where particularly the Secretary of the Air Force, Chief Staff of the Air Force, very clearly made it very clear this is job one, and that we own this problem. So it took from about 1992 to 2014 to go through this cycle of disinterest. I've got other things on my mind, back to a fairly convincing, lasting declaration that this is job one. As I say, somehow the Navy was able to escape the worst consequences of it. Not all of them, but the worst consequences. But now, if I go out there today, I will tell you that the ICBM force feels respected, needed, loved. They still cry. But there's a very, very different attitude. The bomber force was always sort of in between. That they were off doing conventional things and still sustaining their nuclear capability. And while they certainly suffered from fairly intense neglect, particularly logistics, it didn't have as adverse effect on them as it did the missile force. And when I say adverse effect, I don't just mean the people setting the word. I mean the people maintaining it. Support for their equipment, support for their test gear, support for their basic needs to maintain these. Well, that is being rapidly restored. So it's good news.